Life is hectic, demanding, and doesn't stop. When honest with ourselves, we must confess we often don't know what the hell we're doing. The Larkcast is an ongoing conversation about the inclusive and mischievous nature of God's presence through the lens of all the things that make up this phenomenon we refer to as life. Astonishing grace and refreshing honesty collide right here for your weekly encouragement. What is this thing that we call the life of faith? Because for a lot of people, myself included, I know you, we didn't find it in the formalized church.
No.
Right? You found various forms of religion masked as faith, right? You found a number of things that seemed holy and right. They sounded good, right? They're all sort of centered on this idea that the mission that Jesus gave us, the essence of Christianity, the life of faith, you could say, is about loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? And loving your neighbor as yourself. It seems to be like that ongoing narrative that kind of just like runs in our minds. And you see it in almost every church setting. All the social media clips, like that's the mission.
Yeah. And like in the like heavy sort of like doctrine and theology brand of churches, the faith was, kind of like a, A to Z complete set of doctrines and theology
Yep.
that you learned, you know, the finer points and memorized the lexicon of words, and that was referred to as, the faith.
Yep. This is the faith. This is right. This is what we do, man. This is how it happens. And I started thinking about that, man. Just even I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine here locally, and he's sort of going through some stuff right now where he's really just sort of rethinking, in a sense, like who is this God, right? That Jesus revealed. What is actually this life of faith? And for him, his whole background, his whole story from birth, man, it's all tied to the formalized church. And so it's like on one hand, he's going, dude, I'm not finding this freedom that I keep reading that Jesus talks about, this freedom that he's given us. And I'm looking at how the freedom he lives in, and I'm not experiencing like any of that personally. And I said, well, dude, because your whole story, every time we chat, is always tied to, you think the life of faith is all tied to the formalized church. And he goes, yeah, man, but you can't step outside of that thing, dude, because like, the guilt and the fear and, well, what will I do different? And it's like so ingrained in me. And I said, well, have you ever stopped and thought, like, if you formalize anything in the name of Jesus, isn't that the evidence that you don't actually trust grace to be enough? And his eyes kind of lit up, and he goes, wait, say that again. I said, the formalization of this is the evidence of the lack of faith that grace can actually accomplish what it is that we say it can, that it actually is enough, that it can shape you in a way that the law can't. So if that's at the heart of this thing, if that's the root of it, if that's the essence that gives it its whole structure, okay, is that lack of trust that grace is enough, how will it ever lead to the freedom that you're after? You won't find it there. And I mean, he just started laughing. He's like, because dude, I've tried, man. I've showed up, I've signed up, I've volunteered, I've studied, you know, I've
You've done
led.
everything.
Yeah, I joined the groups, I read the books, I did the
Stop
disciplines.
me if you've heard this.
Yeah. I confessed, I redoubled the efforts. I asked God to change me. And I said, yeah. And I said, and were you becoming, as they said, more loving of God and loving of others? And he's like, No. I said
No, you're
no.
actually growing
Mm.
the opposite. You're growing in radical introspection,
Right.
which is the opposite of faith.
Yep.
Because faith looks outside of yourself, but all
Yeah.
that working on yourself to make sure you're loving God and loving others and examining your heart, you know,
Yep.
only led you down a deeper rabbit hole into yourself. And
Yeah.
then the facade of loving others was the thing you needed to add to this.
Yep.
And churches are great if they're in tune with, you know, that side of loving others, and they have a lot of like community projects and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And most people just get to sort of like kind of pat themselves on the back because they go to this church that's doing that thing. And so because they're attached to it, they get to kind of feel like they're doing it,
They're doing
doing
it.
it
Yeah.
too. But it just, it ends up being a thing that is ultimately for yourself because you're on this track to prove that you have true saving faith, or you're really doing it.
Yeah. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the start of this. It's because at the core of the formalized effort, this idea of church that Jesus, right? He didn't call for, he didn't create, is this misunderstanding that Christianity, the life of faith, the mission before us, is loving God and loving others. And it sounds holy, right? You could say it sounds good, sounds spiritual, right? But love, here's the thing: love, when that is demanded and expected, it becomes a law, right? And law, no matter how spiritual it sounds, cannot give life. It can't, never has, never will. And so I started just sort of digging into like, well, where did that come about? Like where did we get the idea that loving God and loving others is the mission before us, that is what the Christian life's about? And it seems to come from like a misunderstanding of, the point that Jesus is making when a Pharisee asked him in Matthew 22, teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I feel like that's where we're like, yeah, there it is. But I know I've done this in the past, and it seems to be something that's been going on for centuries. We never stop and pay attention to who Jesus is actually talking to because he isn't calling us to something here. Okay. He's not calling us to something here. He's answering a very specific question about the law of God that his audience believed was not only the point of life with God, but possible to keep. In short, Jesus, and I know we've said this on here a lot, and we're going to keep saying it. Jesus, in this moment, is not simplifying the law to make it doable. He's summarizing it to show them what the law actually demands and therefore what it exposes. Because, what kind of
It's
love is this?
it's shorthand for death
Yeah, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all the time.
all the time.
That's a death sentence, bro. That's not a map before you that you're like, okay, I got this. Because no one's pulling that off, not even close. So the words love God and love others in this moment and throughout Jesus's teaching is never ever given as a mission. It's always a mirror because the law was never the destination. It was never the destination. And I know we got a chance to really dig into that. And if you're new to the podcast, feel free to check that out. You can back up if you go to the website, click on the podcast link under Learn with Lark. There's actually, if you scroll down, there's some icons there that different teaching series that we've done. And one of those, my favorite one probably is Galatians. And so I know we've gotten into this on there like, in depth, but you know, in a quick sense, the Apostle Paul really drives home. this point that we're making about the law in Galatians 3. And he plainly tells us that the law was the nanny, the crossing guard, the the slightly overbearing babysitter tasked with keeping us from sticking forks into light sockets until Christ came. That's the best way to put it. In verse 24, he calls it a guardian. Okay. It's a term that was used in ancient Judea for basically like a hall monitor tasked with guiding a child safely to the classroom door. But the moment Jesus walked in, okay, verse 25, Galatians 3 tells us the escort's job was done. We are no longer under a guardian. Dude, think about that. Think about centuries of church leadership built on the mission and the whole formalized effort, all centered on love God and love others, because
Yeah.
this is the law. And yet, right here, you are no longer under this law.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer under this guardian. So, clinging to the law, right? As if it can shape us into what only grace can. It's like insisting on a car seat when you've already got a driver's license. And so Jesus doesn't keep running with us down that road. He just keeps holding up that mirror. And I feel like this is a moment when we can basically step into the invitation to swap to what I've lately been calling the switch, the swap. It's like switch your mind on this, man. Like you've got to swap out the categories. It was never about love God and love others. That's not from
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. That's just the essence of the law. So somebody might say, okay, so then what is the life of faith? And what is this Christian life that, well, it is two things. It's just not those two things. See, according to Jesus, number one, he said, trust me. At the heart of the Christian life is a life of trusting in who he already is for you and for everyone else, right? John 6 plainly tells us, this is the will of God, that you believe in the one in whom he sent. In fact, earlier in that chapter, you've got some guys that are, saying to Jesus, like, what must we do to do the works of God? What they're looking at him and they're going, man, how do I walk in this freedom? What are the works of God that I can step into? And in verse 29, John 6, Jesus looks at them and says, this is the work of God, that you trust, that you believe in the Son in
Mm-hmm.
whom he sent. That is the work of God.
Yeah.
Dude, how freeing is that?
Right.
If you're honest about your love game.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, loving God and loving others is always going to be good and beautiful. Like, that's not going anywhere. That's always going to be the heart, the essence of the law. But that's that's not the mission he gave us, right? That's well, in a sense, you could say that's the fruit of the Christian life, right? Not the root of it. That the root of it is to trust in the Son, man.
Yeah, it's like Paul in that same Galatians that you were talking about, 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave
Mm-hmm.
himself for me. That whole
Mm-hmm.
realization begins with um, being crucified, crucifixion, meaning I'm identifying with the death of
Yes.
Jesus. And so if you
Yes.
imagine yourself as alive, meaning a person who really can grab life and faith, by, the horns and like really, sort of like make it happen. Um, you're gonna be like a lot of the characters that come to Jesus and ask those sort of questions. You can always tell when Jesus is um helping someone with their crucifixion because he summarizes the law, as you're saying, not
Yeah.
simplifies it. Um,
Yes.
he doesn't summarize it so that you can more easily walk in
Right.
this.
Yep.
He summarizes it so you can feel the full force and the full weight of what's being required of you.
Hmm.
truly in the law, so you can see like you don't have it.
Yep.
Because if you had it, as Paul said in Galatians, then Christ would have died needlessly. There would be no point. So a lot of times when he summarizes the law and puts a period on it, he's helping someone with their death. He's
Yep.
helping someone come to the end of their religious, moral, spiritual rope. But a lot of times when Jesus is like really, really teaching, he's always pointing to himself as the fulfillment of those things.
Yes.
So
100% every time.
he's showing that he is the substance, the absolute like essence of these pieces that have been in their sort of like their people's stories, forever. So he is the true bread, that's come down out of heaven. He is the sacrificial lamb. He is the true temple. He
Mm.
is, the vine. Um, and so whenever you could just tell the difference. When he puts a period on law, he's helping with someone with their death. When he points to himself, that's when we're
Yep.
really getting to the whole point of the Christian life, which is Christ himself and
Yes.
being the object of our our faith, our affection, you know, for him to become a treasured thing, in our life. Um, the problem is we don't understand nuance and we take
Yeah.
everything very, very literally rather. It's like my son Britton. He's kind of like, well, why would Jesus like mess with them like this? Like why would he kind of go down this sort of path where he doesn't really deliver the whole punchline, but kind of, you know, almost messes with them, to a degree. I was like, Brit, man, because like there's no way to really grab onto this unless you experience some sort of like crisis.
Yeah.
You need to be jarred from your religious sensibilities, and
Yeah.
your trust in your own ability, to do this. You need to sit with that.
Yeah. He has to pull the rug out from under you, right?
Yeah. He
It's,
has to detonate the foundation of your tower of righteousness.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, in Jesus's defense, as if he needs it, but, just playing along here, he did make it plain for people in this early on in his ministry in the Sermon on the Mount. Um, but as the crowds came to him with asking for, plans that they could manage for how to actually go about, doing all that he unveiled in the Sermon on the Mount, it's like it became very clear to him that yeah, this is never going to work. They completely missed every single thing I just said. Like if just as the way Capon put it, if you leave just one crumb of religion, right? People will just grab onto that thing, dude, and not let go, and they'll completely miss the whole meal that's set before them. And so I think that's why from there on he does exactly what you're talking about. Everything is a type of teaching through story and conversation that in a sense he just flips a script on everybody constantly. He has to keep stripping away every single thing that you've thought. Because here we are, man, right? 2000 years later, we've got this idea, this whole movement of the formalized church that, again, that Jesus did not create or call for. That's all primarily centered around the idea that faith is about loving God and loving others. That's the mission before us,
And
which
it's
is the
led it's led by
contrary to what he
people
actually said.
it's led by people who think their job is to help you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, no, 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 guys. The two things that Jesus called us into, if you're talking about, the path before us, it's number one to trust him, right? Like the will of God is not loving hard. It's not, loving better. The will of God, he says in John 6, is looking to the Son and believing in who he already is for us, right? To by faith to accept that death. And I'm just going to say this, that's not a one-time thing, right?
Hmm.
Like that's a daily daily constantly, man. I mean, at least for me, everything in my flesh wants to make the story about Russ,
Yeah.
right? Like that's not going anywhere, man. So it's a daily journey of faith in which I'm basically dying to myths and hopefully by faith grabbing onto the reality that, as according to First Corinthians chapter 1, verse 20, Jesus right now is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. That's that's who he is.
Mhm.
That's who he is right now for all of us.
Yeah.
And the
Colossians says you've
ongoing
been
trust in
hidden.
that.
Colossians says you've been hidden in Christ.
Yeah.
You're not
Yep.
hidden. You're not hidden in a law.
No, no. You're hidden in someone who truly and fully loved God and loved neighbor. And now his life is our life. What's true of him is true of us. To keep trusting this and to, right? Like to keep trusting this that is the life of faith. That is the death, right? The ongoing death that brings life. Now, we could jump into the second thing that Jesus has called us all into that I feel like makes up this life of faith that really, let me say it this way, trusting him, that's number one. And that is where you will find the freedom faith was meant to bring. And that's where you'll keep finding it. And I think the second thing that he actually called us into, which again is contrary to what most of us were all handed, and what I peddled in the name of Jesus for years in the past, throwing myself under the bus in that. I have found is where you'll actually find the fulfillment the freedom was meant to bring. So in number one, you find the freedom that faith was meant to bring. But in number two, you find the fulfillment that freedom was meant to bring. And we don't have time to get into that one. So we're going to do our first ever teaser, man, on the Larkcast.
Oh, we've done some teasers.
Yeah, I want to totally get into it, but I'm just like there it's such a beautiful like story to unpack and a truth to uncover, man, that's so life-giving that I feel like now might be a good point to just hit a pause button and say, sit on this first one. The life before is a life of faith. Christianity is not. It's not about loving God and loving others. It's actually number one about trusting in who Jesus already is for you and everyone else. Number two, just kidding. You have to tune in next week to find out.
Yeah.
We'll
Moment.
unpack that. So until then, cheers,
Cheers.
my friends.